and we've hit 10 a.m. So I'll simply hand over to my friend, board member, and a great man in the field of suicide prevention, who's been a great support over the last couple of years to us, and certainly a great support this week with this event, Pete Shmigel.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Glenn. My job is today to facilitate a group of very excellent speakers, perhaps the key people in the country right now in some respects with regard to the development of suicide prevention policy in the broad and male suicide prevention policy in the smaller set within that. So the title of our session is focusing on the 75%, obviously a reference to the fact that 3/4 of suicide deaths in this country are male. Is it time to develop a national male suicide strategy? Within that, we hope to look at the role of public policy in the broad in terms of guiding work on male suicide prevention. What's the current landscape? How does it compare to the past? What things are we to anticipate going forward? And to contribute to that, we've got some excellent speakers, as I noted, and they are as follows. Alan Woodward is currently acting in an advisory capacity to the National Mental Health Commission as it formulates its plans, particularly with regard to suicide. Has a long-term involvement in this sector, including some 12 or 13 years, I believe, at Lifeline Australia, where he was essentially the brains trust of Lifeline and its policy work. Glen Poole, who has introduced himself already, and in addition to his current role as Executive Director of the Australian Men's Health Forum, has a long background internationally in male suicide prevention policy. Rebecca Burdick Davies, who, though relatively new to our sector in her role as an advocate at Suicide Prevention Australia, the peak body in the suicide prevention sphere, has made a really fast and dynamic start of things. And I know I'm looking forward to some updates on some of the new and innovative work that they've been undertaking around public policy and men. And finally, somebody who is genuinely very much at the coalface, a decision maker in the area of suicide prevention policy, mental health policy, Ivan Frkovic from the Queensland Mental Health Commission, who many would say is leading the charge in this space. As though I'd love for others to be able to challenge that and show me how good they are too. So look, I would like to first of all acknowledge that we are on Indigenous country, no matter where we are today around this wonderful land. I'm on the land of the Burmadigal people of the Darug Nation here in Western Sydney, and perhaps given some of the events around the world at the moment, it's poignant to reflect on racism and what we can do to overcome racism. And certainly there is an additional race dimension, if you will, to male suicide too, that we're very aware of. Okay, so I guess what I'm going to do is I'm going to fire one question at a time to all four of our panelists, and let's hear from them. So the first question I have, panelists, for you is why is it important to have public policy around male suicide prevention? What does it actually enable or change in any real terms to have these things called frameworks and strategies and policy statements, et cetera, et cetera? The answer, panelists, the question, panelists, is why policy for male suicide prevention? Maybe we start with Alan, then Glen, then Rebecca, then Ivan.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Pete. Look, I think yeah, the issue here really is first and foremost is that we are sadly losing around 2,300 men in Australia a year to suicide. But we also know that men are disproportionately affected poorly on a range of mental health and wellbeing factors, and also on issues to do with physical health, such as cancer and also in areas of injury and also alcohol and substance abuse. So there is a fundamental issue around the quality of life for men in this country. And public policy is, I guess, one of the ways in which a country can address circumstances, issues and situations which it wants to address. So here we have an issue affecting half of the population in the country, and not just men in the population, but also the whole population is affected by these issues which play out in the lives of men, and sometimes in the death of men. So public policy is a way of addressing an issue for society, and also a way of then turning the problem into some directions for action, for harnessing expertise, information and evidence as to the best way to tackle those issues, and also to provide mechanisms through which governments can allocate funds, can support programs and support communities and other partnerships in addressing the issues. So public policy, in my view, is really a means to an end rather than an end in itself.
Statement of direction enables allocation of resources, powerful in that sense. Glen, Poole, over to you, and perhaps some commentary from AMHF's perspective on why.
Yeah, so male suicide, is it a social issue? Is it a gender issue? Is it a social issue? Absolutely. 6 men will die today in Australia. So 8 suicides a day, 6 are men, 2 are women. Leading death of men under 55. 30% increase in male suicide in numbers in the last 10 years. I think it's the 10th leading killer of men. Indigenous men, 2nd leading killer. Men over 85, highest rate of suicide, 7 times more likely to suicide than women of the same background. And majority of suicides, well, they're working age, average Aussie blokes. So loads of reasons why it's a social issue. Is it a gender issue? Clearly, not just because 3 out of 4, because it's very gendered in the way it shows up in lots of different ways. Does every suicide matter? Yes. Does every community matter? Yes. Does every gender matter? Yes. And we advocate for gender inclusive approaches that take into account the needs of men, the needs of women, the needs of all genders. But where do you start? You need to start where most of the problem is, which is with men. 3 and 4 suicides are men. And let me say something about the actual social and political context we live in, because we live in a world where we have this very powerful view of gender, which has come from history, which shapes us, that men are strong and powerful, and women are weak and vulnerable. So therefore, women need help and men can help themselves. The way I say it is the way we look at social problems from a gender perspective generally is that women have problems and men are problems. You know, we say that men aren't as good as taking care of their health and they should talk about their feelings about their health like women. And then the minute a man gets a cold and talks about his feelings about it, he's told he's got man flu and he should man up. With mental health, we say to men, come on men, you need to open up. And then when men start to talk in their own language, we tell them to shut up, that they've got too much power, they take up too much space, that they're man-splaining. And this isn't just powerful advocacy that I'm laying down for you here. There's also research into moral stereotypes that tells us that we view men and women differently, that we're more likely to blame men when they have social problems and more likely to care for women when they have social problems. And yet we're more supportive, collectively, all of us, men and women as a population, of policy interventions targeted at women than policy interventions targeted at men. So we need a national male suicide strategy, absolutely 100%.
So Glen has decided to be very subtle today in his contributions, but important commentary about challenging some arguably predominant narratives around mental health and suicide prevention as they apply to men and the services that then flow to them. Rebecca, Burdick, Davies, Suicide Prevention Australia. Rebecca, your official title, if you could, whilst you start your commentary as well.
I'm the Director of Policy and Government Relations.
Thank you.
Great. So look, fantastic question, and obviously a passion area for me, the whole area of public policy. I think Glen and Alan have very eloquently explained why male suicide is a problem that's worth investigating. I mean, 3 of every 4 suicide deaths is a man. There are thousands of men who lose their lives every year. Every suicide is really a preventable death. So that's why it's a problem that we need to tackle. But why public policy? I guess that was really the question. And from my perspective, the reason why public policy is the approach that we need around male suicide prevention is because public policy means decision makers, the people who make change in this country, come together, coalesce around a position and agree to make a difference. And after they come to that agreement, the dollars follow and change happens. We see this in other areas of public health. So we see that around issues like breast cancer. Breast cancer was established as a leading cause of death for women. We saw decision makers come together, agree on an approach. Millions, in fact, billions of dollars have followed, and we've seen the mortality rate of breast cancer dramatically decline since that approach was taken. Male suicide is a staggering problem. More men die by suicide than men die by breast cancer. I believe that a public policy approach is long overdue for male suicide. And I guess it's become a passion area for me at Suicide Prevention Australia because our members, the subject matter experts in suicide, have told me that it's a problem that needs addressing. So public policy is really the only way that will shift the dial in male suicide. Whatever is happening now is not working. And what we see is an absence of, I guess, agreement among decision makers around the approach that we need to take. And that's why I guess Suicide Prevention Australia has taken up Glen's call, a call that Glen has made for quite some time for a national male suicide prevention strategy. And it's a call that I'll be pursuing over the coming months and that we've started to really lobby on with some of those decision makers over the past few weeks.
At some point, Rebecca, if you want to actually fill in that picture about that lobbying process, that'd be great too, okay?
Sure, would love to.
And finally, why policy? Ivan Frkovic, who is Queensland's Mental Health Commissioner. And as I say, Queensland is unique, Ivan, in having a current state-based strategy for male suicide prevention. Is that correct?
Correct. Look, I won't go over some of the stuff that Glen, Alan and Rebecca have spoken about. All of that is relevant in the context of understanding why a policy position is really important in terms of addressing this issue. There is a question around, and something that I'd like to have some really deep discussion here around, from a policy position, is it a separate policy position, or is it part of, as we've tried to do in Queensland, part of our holistic approach to suicide in this particular state? And I think that's some of the nuances that I think we need to talk about. But from where I sit, having been involved in probably 3 or 4 different suicide prevention plans, strategies, frameworks in my life, both at the state and the federal level. The first one was in 1998 when we had a fairly high rate of youth suicide. We developed a plan and looked at, and in fact, we have to say, and I'm not sure it was exactly to do with the plan, but it was a whole range of multiple factors which contributed to this, but we did see youth suicide on the decrease. And so having a particular plan focus is critical. I'll tell you why. I think it brings the issue to public attention. I think what we need is to bring male suicides better to public attention. And that can certainly happen through a policy position that is endorsed by government and reflects the views of the community about what needs to be done. But what it also does, and I think picking up Rebecca's point and other people's point, it engages government in taking this issue on in a proactive way. But not just government, a policy position will also start to influence community perception that this is an important issue. And that's what we need, community literacy greater to understand the importance of this issue and how to tackle it by having a policy frame that actually identifies it, says this is what we're going to do about it. We understand it's an issue. All those things that policies will do to drive change, as I think was said. But finally, and I think sort of one of the most important things, you can raise awareness, but does it change behaviour? And that's the difference between the two. And I think we've got to think about policies. Do they just raise awareness, or can we have a policy that actually changes behavior? And that behavior is really about both reaching out to men seeking for health, but also having a system where men feel comfortable that they can approach both at that formal and informal level to get some of that support. And that needs investment. But when you have a policy position, as one of my previous bosses in health said, policy without resources is philosophy. And we're not here to implement philosophy. So I think those two go hand in hand. And I think if we can get all of that happening, then I think you've got that, and then change happens. Now, change is slow. It never happens as quickly as we want. But I think by having that sort of public awareness through a policy position, engage government and community, having resources, they're the critical elements to shift the system, but also shift the community, but also tackle this particular issue. And I think a policy position around men's suicide is critical. The question is whether it should be a separate position or whether we can tackle it as we've tried to do. And our policy focuses very strongly on men's high rates of suicide in Queensland.
Okay. We've heard some very potent arguments in favor of policy in general. And now we're getting into a debate about whether it should be a standalone policy for male suicide prevention or integrated into a broader framework. There are pros and cons. In general, we've heard things like, it makes decision makers focus, it enables resources, it has an interesting community influence, it brings issues to public attention, it's ways to capture, if you will, the zeitgeist of the moment, recognize the problem and move forward. Okay, good, as Ivan just said, good philosophy, right? Where do we think we're at right now in Australia with regard to male suicide prevention policy? Are we at, levels 0, 1, 2, 3 of very low levels of maturity compared to other countries or compared to, other policy areas? Are we at 6, 7, 8, and 9s of high levels of maturity? If I could ask panelists to comment on, what encourages you at the moment? And while you're doing that, if you could consider Ivan's question as well, good thing or otherwise in terms of a separate national male suicide prevention policy statement. So maybe we'll go in a slightly different order this time. Glen.
Thank you. So, look, you'll have picked up already that my accent is an Australian. I'm clearly a Queenslander, but before being a Queenslander, I was clearly a POM, right? And so I've had a perspective from different countries. And one thing we forget in Australia, despite the fact that we bang on about, quite rightly as advocates, about the 6 deaths a day or that men die 6 years younger than women, from a health advocate's perspective, there's also great things to celebrate in Australia. We're one of like a handful of countries that have a national men's health strategy, full stop. I'm not aware of any country that's got a specific policy on male suicide. If anyone knows, tell me. I'm not aware. So we're leading the world in having men's health strategy, but no one's doing the male suicide approach really well from a policy perspective that I know of. And I think we shouldn't get lulled into a false sense of security in terms of our men's health strategy. Yes, it's refreshed and new, 2020 to 2030. Yes, it's got mental health, including male suicide, as one of the top 5 issues. In fact, male suicide is repeated across many of the 5 issues. It's not just in one of the top 5 issues. So it's really strongly in the men's health strategy. Can I point to you where the actual action is within that strategy? Well, yeah, it says that, this strategy sits within a framework and some of the issues are taken care of in other strategies. So it points you over here to the 5th National Mental Health and Suicide Prevention Plan. And then you open up that plan and you go, right, this is where all the information about what we're doing about male suicide will be. And it's not in there. Mm. And we've raised this at a policy level. We've said it's no good just to point to other strategies. You've got to make sure that the men's health strategy says that health systems should be orientated towards men. It's not about getting men to change to fit into the system. We need to orientate the system to reach out to men, to respond to the needs consciously. These are the words, to consciously take into account the needs and the preferences of men across all levels of government, right? And that isn't getting outside of the National Men's Health Strategy. It's not making its way into the National Suicide Prevention Strategy. It's not making its way down to a state level, because only 2 states and territories actually have a men's health policy. That's New South Wales and WA. And then it shows up in random places because of good individuals. So it shows up, for example, in Queensland, where someone's taken, I don't know who led that initiative, Ivan, but it's worth acknowledging, it's why we invited you here, that Queensland has specifically targeted men as a vulnerable population in its suicide prevention plan. But that's the exception, not the rule. So we've got some frameworks to work with, a national men's health strategy, lots of investment going into suicide prevention. I must acknowledge that quite a lot of investment, a reasonable amount of investment has gone into targeting men through the PHNs, but more through a commissioning route than a policy route. And of course, we need to acknowledge that we now have a PM's got a suicide prevention advisor, and interesting stuff is happening there, which no doubt we'll talk about more. So we've got a head start. And to me, it doesn't matter where you put it, as Ivan has shown and I'm sure other people were involved as well as just Ivan, but as Queensland has shown, you don't have to wait for the government to have a national strategy in order to start having male-focused initiatives at a local level. I think where it needs to go is where it's most likely to gain traction. It doesn't matter, as long as there are mechanisms in place to get it replicated at every level. It doesn't just do what the National Men's Health Strategy does, which is point somewhere else and then the trail peters out.
Okay, so we're hearing from Glen some glass half full aspects, some glass half empty aspects, but particularly a strong call in terms of an expression that Zach Seidler used a couple of days ago, and that is made with men in mind in terms of policy development, which is a powerful phrase. Rebecca, what encourages you at the moment in terms of where we're at, where we're not at, et cetera, et cetera?
Sure, thanks, Peter. What encourages me is, well, I think the most difficult part of public policy making or shifting the dial on public policy is often getting people to recognise there's a problem in the first place. So convincing influential people, politicians, particularly at the national level in the jurisdictions, premiers and ministers, that there is a problem that's worth addressing. I feel that part of the issue has been tackled. So over the past 8 weeks alone, I've spoken with a premier, a couple of premiers' officers, with 10 different ministers from across the country, and with scores of MPs. And I can honestly say that every single one of those influential people that I was able to speak to acknowledged that male suicide is a problem that needs addressing. So that big hill that you need to pass in public policy making that's been crossed. So that acknowledgement is there. I think where we have the challenge now is really just going to Glen's point, is convincing policymakers and decision makers to take that next step around, okay, we know there's a problem. This is how we're going to acknowledge it in official strategies and documents, which matter, because those official strategies and documents are tied to dollars. And as I said before, you need decision makers to agree on a position, then dollars need to follow. And of course, as Ivan said before, the community also needs to, I guess, provide a groundswell of support behind an issue. However, look, we have a National Suicide Prevention Advisor, as Glen mentioned, and I'm really happy to see Alan here as Christine Morgan's representative today. I'm not sure if you're aware, Glen, you likely are, but in Christine Morgan's initial report published earlier this year, but submitted to the PM in November last year, there is a specific part of that report that acknowledges the need for tailored interventions and strategies to address male suicide. So we've actually already started to I guess, reach that next stage of policy, public policy making or public policy change, which is having those influential people start agreeing on approach. Where I think we still have a lot of work to do, and Suicide Prevention Australia certainly has a lot of work to do, is to convince the National Suicide Prevention Advisor and other key decision makers that a national suicide prevention strategy needs to have a specific stream called out around male suicide prevention. A gender neutral, gender agnostic approach won't work. We've seen that in place for decades now, and it's not making a difference to suicide rates for men. So I think that's the key challenge for us as a peak body. And we're really, I guess it's incumbent on us to speak with you and with the people who are on this call, with our membership, the subject matter experts to get your ideas about how we can make that change happen. So look, I'm a glass half full at the moment. I feel we're at a watershed moment in history, I think.
Rebecca has outlined that, that in her experience, we've got strong issue recognition, awareness that there's a real problem, some good signs of that problem being documented and recognized in broader documentation. But this next phase to come, how do you actually go from recognition to action in the form of resources, other activity, et cetera, et cetera. Can I also draw a line under some of Rebecca's comments, put them in bold and italic, if I will, using the technology that what you're actually hearing from SBA, I think it's fair to say is a lot more engagement around male suicide than we've seen in the past from SBA, okay? And that's a credit to the organization and its internal debate from the perspective, I think, of many activists in this space. Ivan, what's encouraging you at the moment? Where's the glass half full? Where are the opportunities?
Look, I have to say, particularly prior to COVID-19, I was actually very much, encouraged about the way things were going and moving, and certainly, this has sort of shaken some of that path, and there's been sort of a reprioritization, but suicide prevention is still maintained as one of those priorities. But can I pick up from a policy perspective, Glen's point, but also Rebecca's? Remember, we live in a country that has federal system, and then you've got the states. I think, Glen, picking up your point around when you've got a national male suicide strategy that's pointing to the national mental health and suicide prevention plan, I think that's a challenge in itself. I think in some way, because it is a health strategy rather than the mental health strategy, the way I'm trying to work the system here is around, for example, the national mental health and suicide prevention plan provides the broad architecture for the states to feed off. Now, what our Shifting Minds plan looks like around mental health and drug and alcohol and suicide prevention will be slightly different to New South Wales or Victoria because of the contextual differences, historical development of services, funding arrangements, all those things are different. So I've tried to frame Shifting Minds around that. And then within that, so I'm trying to link policy, and I'll tell you in a minute why that's important, because trying to link policy and policy directions that way down, and then underneath Shifting Minds, which is the state mental health and drug and alcohol plan, we've got two sub-plans, which we finished one, which was Every Life, which was around suicide prevention, and that's where we strongly focused around men and men's rates of suicide, but we're also working on a drug and alcohol plan. Now, all of those things are unpacking with more specificity, if there's such a word, to be able to sort of make sense of what needs to happen at the jurisdictional level. And those plans are now also feeding into what the PHNs and our local HHSs are doing in their own operational plans at the local level. Unless we get some of that policy alignment, we're not going to be able to tackle this, and we're always going to have a range of gaps and things that we can't seem to sort of tackle. I'm trying to align the policy environment, but what that also does, it brings into play the investment that goes down. So it's not duplicating, it's not creating gaps as much as possible. We're trying to now follow the dollars to say, this is what the evidence says at the national level, the state and the local level, federal government and state government. If you're going to invest, this is where you need to invest to achieve the change. And that gives me a bit of heart, at least from a Queensland perspective. One of the things that I've tried to do as best as I can is align those policy positions so that we are clear about when the feds put money in, we know where it should go, but also when the state puts in, we can complement that to achieve the outcomes that, which are required. Obviously, we don't have all the money that we need, and we've got, a range of things to do, but at least we've got a clear direction around investment and where it should go and where the priorities are. For example, for us, the priorities at this particular point are male suicide rates. What are the things under Every Life that need to translate into actions to tackle male suicide? Because we know it's 75% of all of our suicides in this country. So I think from a policy position, I'm heartened, at least from a Queensland perspective, we've tried really hard, and I can tell you, bringing government agencies, the non-government sector, the private sector, the broader community onto the same page is a critical aspect. But it's like herding cats. But you've got to keep working at that, because otherwise what happens, we have fragmentation. People ask for all sorts of things from the feds, from the state, and we don't know what's happening in the actual ecosystem. And we then miss things. We don't focus on things that are really important. We don't actually achieve what we set out to do. So I'm trying to channel that. And I think from a policy perspective, if we could do more of that, not that I'm saying we're doing it perfectly, we've got a long way to go too, but at least we've got a strong focus around how do you translate policy into reality. Now, I can say to you, there's not one policy that I've seen that wasn't written probably, fairly adequately with the right things, etc. Where it fails is implementation. My focus is how do I drive to ensure that what the policy says we actually achieve as best as we can with the resources that we got. And I think that's the critical aspect around policy, particularly around male suicide.
Ivan, I might actually, given the experience in Queensland, the attempt to align with national priorities, the attempt to, to create that ecosystem of your own policies, et cetera, between alcohol, suicide, et cetera, and the distinction that you're still drawing around male suicide in particular, given that, you've thought long and hard about that architecture, are you seeing signs of behavioral change? Are you seeing the rubber hitting the road in the way that you would want it to?
Look, I think some of the early signs are good. As I said, we've had a bit of interruption. So the early signs were, sort of really quite good. Not only did we have a clear plan, we also had a government investment, well over $80 million, nearly $100 million if you take everything into consideration, across 4 broad areas. And I won't go into these, but around how do you build resilience around particularly the broader community, but men, specifically resilience, younger men, in terms of some of this stuff. There's a focus on that. We also know about vulnerability. What are the contexts where men are particularly vulnerable? Family law, employment, drug and alcohol, relationship problems. There's a whole range of things. Where's the level of vulnerability? Where do we need to focus? And then we've also been able to, for the first time, say to the service delivery system, just by providing all roads leading to emergency department or mental health services is not the answer. We really want people to be supported in situ in the community where people can get the supports, but we also, picking up Glen's point, we also want services which are proactively going out to people rather than waiting people to sort of look for that. And then the biggest problem in all of this, and I hear this from men every day, but I hear it from, the broader community, how do we get the system to damn work together to actually achieve some sort of a safety net? So I feel that that's what's starting to, some of that architecture is coming together, and we're seeing elements in all of that. It's not perfect by any means. I'm not overstating what we're doing in Queensland, but I'm saying we've got a clear plan. We've got a commitment by government, by community, by the agencies, by the non-government sector, by the private sector, that this is what we need to do. And we're going to have a go at it. And we're going to focus on this for the next 5 to 10 years and really give it a go.
Alan, I didn't set up the order in this way, but it's kind of logical that the final word on what you're encouraged by goes to you, and an interesting opportunity to respond to many issues that I imagine you're thinking about in terms of design and architecture, and how, as somebody who comes out of a service delivery background, how do you move from appropriate and well-intended words to actual outcomes in terms of male suicide prevention?
Yeah, thanks, Pete, and thanks to the other panelists. There's been some really good points made. I guess I'm also reflecting at this point in time that we have actually come some way in Australia. And I go back to Glen's original comment. The fact that this country has got a national men's health strategy, a strategy which embraces the concepts of health and well-being, that directly mentions references to the social and emotional health of people, as well as addressing issues around mental ill health. The fact that we have got a recognition of the importance of male-based orientations at that strategic level is a bonus, because we didn't always have that. And I remember back in 2008 thinking that the original mental health plan was a major step forward. And it was, when you look back on it, I reread it again this week, and it was a bit thin, frankly, but it was a step forward in 2008. And the then Minister for Health was directly talking about commitment to addressing issues of men, and it included very explicitly references to suicide prevention, to issues around distress and despair in men, and to related issues around quality of life and well-being. And we now have got a national strategy, which is 2020 to 2030. And again, I was at the launch of that, and I've heard the minister speak, and I've heard others, and so on. We have got a basis there. So to me, there's a really big question. I don't know that we need to be talking about yet another strategy, and particularly in view of some of the current work that's underway. I mean, with the National Mental Health Commission, we are putting together the Vision 2030, which is a long-term approach to mental health and well-being for this country. Not a 5-year plan, not a 2-year plan, but a plan that will go for 20 years. What we're also looking at is the work through Christine Morgan's role as the Prime Minister's advisor on suicide prevention to a whole-of-government approach on suicide prevention. Now, for male suicide prevention, this is a major watershed, because one of the points that's been made constantly over the years is that many of the psychosocial or social determinants, or if you like, the contextual or situational issues that males respond to in their lives must be addressed in male suicide prevention. Well, they must be addressed in all people in terms of suicide prevention, but there are some particular ways in which things play out for men. So here we have, led by the Prime Minister, with the support, I believe, of other jurisdictions around the country, having heard many of the premiers and looked at what is happening in suicide prevention, you're seeing a national interest in suicide prevention that is unprecedented. And it is picking up not just the issues around mental ill health, but it is moving into a broader field, and it is providing the mechanisms. So, there are those ways to plug into. So to me, it's not so much a question about, do you need a strategy? Because to me, there are frameworks and strategies there. To me, it's a far more, practical question around, but what are you going to do? How do you link to those strategies? And I think some of the points that Ivan was making are really, really important to focus on, because, you can have, decision makers in government or community leaders or business leaders, receptive to the issues around doing more things for men's health and well-being and male suicide prevention. But then they say, well, what should we do and how? It raises a further complexity, and that is for which men and in which circumstances and in what ways? Because, actually, not all men are the same, and not all men have the same life experiences or issues. And we know that there are some particular issues around suicidal behaviour and amongst men that seem to occur more frequently in farming communities, for example, in men who are unemployed or have struggled with workplace issues, for men who have undiagnosed, unrecognised underlying depression or anxiety issues. There are some circumstantial issues around, family relationships and family breakdown. There are issues around how men may see themselves in society. And when we see that older men, those over the age of 80, have the highest age-based suicide rate in the country, and research that was undertaken by Kylie King and others at the University of Melbourne, speaking with actual older men, unpacking this issue about having a sense of meaning and feeling useful in life as being so important. So, the thing is, it's not just about making a loud voice to say something needs to be done. It needs to be defined as to what needs to be done, for whom and in what ways. And if I could throw another little bit into it, is that part of public policy is also to protect the interest of the public broadly, that they get good quality services and supports from governments and others. Government has got a protective role for the community, which often plays out in how government regulates activities or chooses what it funds. And there's a real need, I think, to define what is actually good in a program for men or a service for men. What makes it good, and how do you protect that quality? What are the standards of practice? What are the features? of a good program for men, how should mainstream programs demonstrate that they're responsive to the needs of men and truly be attractive and utilised by men? And how can we promote that? Now, Suicide Prevention Australia, through a quality improvement program, which again is a watershed initiative that this country is pursuing. There are very few countries in the world that have a quality improvement program in suicide prevention, and we're one of those. What a wonderful opportunity to build into that some standards and some practice guides and some definitions of good practice in terms of male suicide prevention programs. So I guess in summary, what I'm saying is, look, I think there are the bones are there. The frameworks are there, and we've worked hard over the years to get a lot of that. And there's a bit more work to go. The Vision 2030 is continuing to be developed, and the Prime Minister's advisor, Christine Morgan, will provide her report at the end of this year on whole of government. But, there's also a need for those working in the field and actually for men to be able to put forward and say what we need, what really works in a practical sense is this. This is what good looks like, and this is what is going to be effective in making a difference.
Some strong insights from Alan, and a very strong message. One of your messages is that we have some critical mass already around male suicide prevention policy, and perhaps it's wise to leverage from that point and to amplify from that point, particularly towards improved service delivery. And I do very much appreciate your comment about men of lived experience, of whom I am one. I will actually invite panelists as we go through our next round, though, to comment on the theme that is coming up here, and that is, are we more likely to succeed in getting male suicide prevention outcomes through what you might call the integrated approach, e.g. that male suicide prevention sits within an overall well thought through suicide prevention policy framework and appreciates the commonalities and the complexities? Or are we better off taking what you might call an affirmative action approach, which is often the rationale for setting up whether it's LGBTIQ strategies or Indigenous strategies, et cetera, e.g. that you have to take into account special needs, right? So just bear that in mind as we go through the next question, which is as follows. What worries you about the current status of male suicide prevention policy? What keeps you up at night? Where are the gaps? What are the things that we should be doing very quickly that we're not doing? And Rebecca, starting with you, and also as you comment on that, if you could give me some commentary about separate or together.
I'll answer that bit first, separate or together. So I'd say that we're not really asking for a separate male suicide prevention strategy. What we're asking for is for male suicide, or for men to be called out as a vulnerable group in a national suicide prevention strategy. So just as we see in Queensland, men are called out as a vulnerable group that have specific needs and that require specific interventions and strategies to meet those needs, we need to see that acknowledgement in national strategies. So I think that's the first point that I'd like to make. We're not sort of saying set up a separate framework or a new plan, yet another strategy just specifically for men. We're saying that men need to be recognised as a vulnerable group. So that's the first thing that I'd like to say. I guess I said before, I'm an optimist. I feel like we have decision makers, people like Alan, who are absolutely behind solving the absolutely staggering tragic problem of male suicide. So that's there. We have a National Suicide Prevention Advisor in Christine Morgan, who is reporting directly to the Prime Minister. I don't think we've ever seen a landscape in Australia where we have so many influential people who are willing to make change in the whole space of suicide prevention. So I guess I'm an optimist in that sense. However, where I think we still have a lot more to go, and where I think there's been it's something that we really want to see progressed over the next 6 or 7 months, is Christine's appointment is due to expire at the end of this year. So that appointment might be extended. I don't know. Perhaps, Alan, you could shed some light on that. But Christine's job as National Suicide Prevention Advisor is due to end in December this year. From our perspective, what we need to see is a permanent systems architecture. That sounds very jargony, but we need a permanent Office of Suicide Prevention with a National Suicide Prevention Advisor at its head going forward. That's something that I think we'd really like to see coming as an outcome of Christine's work. And it's also something that we've seen in other jurisdictions abroad, which have seen a reduction in their suicide rates. So the Republic of Ireland and Japan, very, very different countries, but they've both seen a progressive decline, long-term decline in their suicide rates. I'm not saying that they're directly comparable to Australia, but what they have done is embrace a whole of government, whole of community approach to suicide prevention. And I think if we're looking at male suicide in particular, that's a manifestation of a whole series of life issues. Alan went through them before. There could be relationship issues, financial distress, unemployment, all those life stresses. And the only way we can tackle those root causes, those social determinants of suicide, is through that whole of government, whole of community approach. And to do that, we need the role that Christine has now, that role of National Suicide Prevention Advisor, to be a permanent part, a permanent feature of government in future. So that's what I think is missing. The other thing that I believe is missing is really, I think this is going to a couple of points that Glen has made and a few points I've seen on the chat. So thanks very much for everybody who's been providing comments, which is, how are we going to make, we talk about services and programs being male friendly or tailored to the needs of men. No two men are the same. Every man has a distinctive experience. But what we're really looking for at Suicide Prevention Australia, and we've certainly said this to Christine, and we've made this a big feature of our submissions to Christine for her considerations, is the fact that we need to start on a customer journey mapping exercise. So by that, what I mean is we need to work with people with lived experience, with men with lived experience, with women with lived experience, with people with lived experience, to understand what their experience of the suicide prevention system has looked like. And by doing that, we can find out where are the failures, where are the key intervention points or opportunities that we're missing. And that's the way that we can overhaul the system. So I guess that's the second thing. We need to actually put customer is, I know that's a controversial way of describing someone who experiences the suicide prevention system, but we need to put them at the heart of the way we design services and programs. So two things: whole of government approach, permanent Office of Suicide Prevention, and the way that we design services and programs to put the customer at its heart. So they're the two big things that I guess we feel are missing, that we'd like to see change over the next few months.
Thank you, Rebecca. Ivan, your worries and perhaps some commentary about, what's the right architectural approach? And we've just heard from Rebecca that there's also merit in considering growing the pie overall in terms of suicide prevention resources and a client focus that takes into account men at risk, vulnerable men, priority groups like men. Ivan.
Look, can I say what worries me? And it's worried me more broadly in mental health, but it worries me particularly, when you focus around particularly men's suicide, is that we have a strong focus on the treatment response. We invest most of our dollars, downstream in terms of more doctors, more nurses, more hospital beds, more ED departments, more clinicians, etc. And I think, look, and I'm not anti that. I think we certainly, we are underfunded in mental health more broadly than the general sort of health area. So I'm not anti that. I think the biggest challenge that I've got, and I think this is a challenge when it comes to men's suicide, how do we push the system upstream? And I keep, this is one thing I've been fighting for a long time in Queensland. How do you focus on, for example, upstream, where you build resilience amongst boys around some of those things that Glen said in his introduction very nicely. The contradictions around being strong, but also, being able to talk about your feelings and all those things that I think, so how do we actually work with the younger generation, particularly boys in that developmental stages, about, these types of issues? And I think we've got to think about how do we move some of our investment resources focus upstream. The other bit that I think is, and I know there's been some discourse on the chat around this sort of vulnerability versus a priority group, etc. Look, vulnerability was used broadly in our plan for a whole range of vulnerable groups, including particularly men, but I think discourse is important. Why we used vulnerability rather than priority was that there's always this sort of, a ladder board around who's on the priority list this week or next month, etc. We used a much more broader term about vulnerability, and particularly what we wanted to, and you'll see in our plan as well, that was deliberately done to try and focus on those things upstream as well, around general distress that people feel before they have a mental illness, before they need to go and see a service. How can I get support in my time of distress? And that's not to do that I have a diagnosis. I'm in distress. How can I get that support? And I'm vulnerable at this stage for a whole range of life circumstances. How can I get that support? So we push that whole process upstream, and you'll talk, and you'll see in our plan, and we're still working on this around how do you provide, general distress brief intervention to people in our broader society, whether it's through neighbourhood centres, men's sheds, a whole range of places where people can go and deal with their distress. That is critical. And what worries me about focusing on the system is that men particularly, but generally people don't want all roads to lead to ED departments and inpatient mental health services. They want services in situ and outside, but that's eating up a lot of our dollars. That's an expensive system. And not that we don't need more. I'm not arguing anti, but I'm saying we also got to look at that system. That system is also a reactive system. You've got to go to it. Men need to be able to have services which are coming out to them in various forms, not services in the broad sense of clinical mental health, but a whole range of services I'm talking about, whether it's men's sheds, whether it's neighbourhood centres, whether it's a whole range of things. All of those things need to be much more proactive, offering support to men in situ where they can talk about their particular distress. And look, we have very few services that are proactive in terms of reaching out to men. We've got Mates in Constructions and Mates in Energy and a few other things which work quite well. There's other services, I'm sure. But that's what worries me, that we have a reactive system when I am at a really high point of, thinking about life is not worthwhile living, rather than dealing and being able to deal with my distress at a very early phase, to be able to sort of, feel that I'm still worth it. I still have a role, have a purpose in life, all those things which are important to all of us. I think that if I could push the system further up that stream, that's what distresses me. And that's hard. It's not easy, but that's the sort of what keeps me awake. How do I move the system upstream where you intervene early, you look at levels of vulnerability, but you also build resilience among particularly young boys. And we know when it comes to young boys, Indigenous young boys, and LGBTI community generally, but sort of males in that sort of sense, are really vulnerable in that space.
I'm following the chat as the rest of you are, and you would have noticed the degree to which Ivan's comments about building resilience, moving upstream, preventative as opposed to interventative services are really resonating with those of you. Somebody put up the comment, we need to move from being ambulances at the bottom of the cliff to being way before the cliff, having really good conversations with men about reasons for living as opposed to reasons for dying, etc. So a lot of agreement and unanimity around this notion of early preventative measures, resilience. Could we now hear from Alan, thanks, on your worries?
Oh,
other than that, you don't have the best hold in FJ and the Illawarra region.
Yes, and Peter's, they're disclosing my obsessions as a petrol head, but when you grow up in Wollongong, in my era, of course, everybody was a petrol head. Look, I think there's not so much worries, but I do have an unease, and I'd like to, I guess, enlarge a bit on some of Ivan's comments around, moving everything. So, we don't end up always having to respond to situations where a man's life has completely fallen apart, or worse still, a man has died, and a family's left without a father and a husband and all that tragedy. As well as, we need to look at the quality of life for men, so that men really do participate in our society, and our society is enriched by the wonderful contributions that all men can make, because men are fantastic. Now, I think one of the things that needs to occur is, concurrently with all the issues around public policy, programs and services being funded to a standard and being effective, there is also a need to look at the community level. What can happen at the community level? Because if we want to make an impact in the lives of most men, or as many men as possible, then it will be through their interactions with the people around them, where they live and work and play. And that's even further borne out by the statistics that show that men do not access the formal professional services to the same extent as women. It's borne out by the fact that men may be needing to explore how they deal with an issue in their life rather than simply say, well, I'll book myself in to talk about it with someone. Maybe it's because men need a different form of support, and maybe it's also because sometimes the environment that the man is operating in socially is not supportive of them looking to address the issues in their lives. I had the enormous pleasure last year of going and speaking at one of the regional suicide prevention networks in the Bundaberg region in Queensland. And I spoke, I guess, on some of the things that I have learned over the years, particularly around crisis support services such as Lifeline and others, and the importance of being able to be there and support people when they're distressed. And I'm a very strong believer in us providing compassionate and responsive services when people are in distress as a basic need in our society. Those sort of services need to be almost core infrastructure in our society, because anybody can have a rough patch. But I was also struck when I was at the Bundaberg meeting, listening to presentations and looking at stalls there of community-based programs, working with all range of people, but the ones that really took my attention were the ones working with boys and men. Doing things such as taking fathers and sons out and doing activities with them together to strengthen the relationships beyond simply a pat on the shoulder and how you going, mate. One of the programs that really struck me was dealing with young men. Let's call them young men. They were perhaps men in the 15, 16, 17 age group, but they're young men who had had terrible trauma in their lives. And unfortunately, very sadly, so many young people do have this trauma still in this society. And it was a program that simply sought to connect with them, because those kids, they're not going to go off to a formal health service. They're not going to book themselves in to see a psychologist or a counsellor easily. Half of them are just trying to find somewhere to be safe. And here's a program at a community level led by people who had themselves recovered from enormous trauma and difficulty in their lives, so knew exactly what was going on for those young men. And I saw other programs at a community level that were reaching out to promote the notions of what is a good mental health approach in your life, addressing the issues around exercise, diet, sleep, activity, social connection. These are the things that create a mentally healthy lifestyle, and in themselves continue to boost our ability to roll with whatever life throws at us. So I'm a great believer in the community-based approach. And part of what I think has to happen out of whatever's done in terms of policies, strategies, programs and effort is to find a way to support that community side of things so that the people have real supports, have social networks that support them, that encourage the idea of looking after yourself and your well-being as much as you look after others around you.
I like a turn of phrase, and one that comes through Alan's comments is immunity through community. If I could ask Glen to have the final word on what worries him, which is very difficult for Glen to respond to because he's the most positive person that I actually know and a tremendous problem solver.
It's all a facade. It is built on constant worry that I have to come up with problems and positivity all the time to fix it. So, but thank you, Pete. Yeah, look, what worries me first is that we don't have enough male advocates and advocates for men. And it's really important. And there's actually a stigma. There's a cultural stigma about advocacy for men. I'm not going to go into it. We haven't got time. But there is absolutely 100% a cultural stigma, a resistance, a barrier to advocacy for men. Let me just give you a little light way it shows up at a strategic level, because we're in a policy conversation. We have a men's health strategy and a women's health strategy. I invite you to go into those strategies and Google the words advocacy or lived experience. You'll find words about advocacy and lived experience in the women's health strategy. You won't find them in the men's health strategy because men don't need advocacy and men don't have lived experience. What men are consumers, and there's a consumer engagement policy. Men are not consumers. Men are human beings with lived experience who need to be advocated for. And we can't just leave it to a bullet point in a strategy or a policy to ensure that men's needs are addressed. Men matter, men count, and their voices need to be heard, and mechanisms need to be in place to ensure that their voices and experiences are heard. So I want a separate, to go back to your question, Pete, I want a separate policy. I want a separate men's health minister or male suicide prevention officer. I don't care what the mechanism is, but it's got to be real and solid. It can't be a bullet point. There's got to be policy, practice, and people, and we can't just let this conversation stop in the world of policy. It has to filter down to practice, and it has to filter down to the people, and the people that matter in this particular conversation, first and foremost, are men. Yeah. So, and I want to acknowledge, actually, the fearless men's health advocates that have gone before us, because I can go back 20 years to, for example, Professor John MacDonald, who was advocating for a social determinants approach to suicide prevention. We're now shifting that way. With the work of Christine Morgan, taking mental health, suicide prevention beyond mental health and into all departments. There's a genuine shift there. But it concerns me that if we don't put a gender focus on this, because the two things that men's health activists have asked for is a social determinants approach that goes beyond the mental health approach and a gender-specific approach. And it does concern me, with the best will in the world, that Christine, who's done an amazing job, is balancing so many interests that the male suicide piece will get lost. It's not that it's not there, but it will get lost. It really does concern me, because that gender piece needs to be, I'm the only, Christine's got 20 advisors on her expert advisory group. I'm the only one advocating specifically for men. There are other people with an interest in male suicide, but I'm the only one advocating specifically for men. And if I wasn't at that table, well, who in that room would be advocating for men? If I go and I get hit by a bus or decide to go back to the better weather of England, who fills that space? It's not that there aren't people out there, but there's not a massive network of us. And that needs to be there. And there's a couple of places where it shows up, so a real focus on the gender-specific approach is really important that we don't lose that, because it disappears very quickly, very quickly. It gets lost very quickly. And there aren't the mechanisms at federal and state level to ensure it stays in place. There's not a state body, there's not like a state peak body for men's health in every state and territory. There aren't the advocacy networks out there. So we need to build those. It's really important. And then the other two things that I tried to keep at the top of my mind in my work with Christine Morgan, because you can't do everything, right? So we need those advocates looking at those social determinants like relationship breakdown, like financial issues, many of the things that have been mentioned, men's relationship with alcohol, men's experience of unemployment, all of those things, not just mental health. But the two areas I keep focused on, most of all, because they worry me, are lived experience and peer support. So lived experience. So the lived experience spaces, there's quite a few dichotomies in the lived experience space. There's the tension between people who've actually had lived experience. So there's men who've had experience of suicide, and there's people who've had experience of male suicide, like a mother who's lost her son, or a woman who's lost her husband, right? And all those voices are valid, right? But there is a tension between those who've actually experienced suicidality and those who've been bereaved. But there's also another tension between those who have the mental health experience of suicide, who will tell the story, you know, I had mental health issues, I had a diagnosis, I didn't really take care of it, I suicided, I realized what an idiot I was, fortunately I didn't kill myself, now I take better care of my mental health, and other men should do the same. It's a very important story, but it's one very acceptable narrative in the lived experience space. We're okay about hearing about the man who's learned better to take better care of his mental health, but we're really not comfortable about hearing about the bloke telling us the story of how the police got involved when he had a domestic with his wife and he didn't see his kids and there was a false allegation of sexual abuse, or how he really struggled to actually pay for his wife's needs and his kids' needs when he was facing unemployment. Some suicide lived experience stories are really raw, particularly when they're articulated by men, and they're not in the lived experience space. So I think men's voices are missing from the lived experience space. And there's a tendency to actually, we have to train people how to speak about suicide in the way that we find acceptable before we'll hear their voice, rather than actually hearing the raw voice of what a suicidal man is going through and what he thinks and what he feels. We're not hearing those stories. That's really important. And there needs to be those stories of experiencing the social issues and pathways to suicide, not just the mental health issues. So I'm a massive advocate for us hearing more of men's stories. We can't just keep saying men need to talk and then not listen. We need to listen to what men are telling us. We really do. And we need mechanisms in place to hear that. And the other piece that worries me is peer support. And I'll be true to form, Pete. I'll turn it into a positive thing, because it really is, right? There's something really exciting happening. We're talking a lot here about top down, but I think what's really important is top down and bottom up, policy, practice, and people. Now you can look back at one of the great successes in Australia in the men's health movement. We've got Movember, we've got Mason Construction that Ivan's mentioned, and we've got men's sheds. And that's just the M's, folks. There's a whole alphabet of them. And someone mentioned this yesterday in our event with PHNs. They posted in the chat box something like, Australia's got a great history of guerrilla men's health movements, right? Which the men's sheds movement, guerrilla men's health, I love that, right? This is masculinity at its strength, Australian masculinity at its strength, mates helping mates. I travelled around Australia in a motorhome with my missus. Every time we broke down, there was a bloke there to help us. Mates helping mates. It's the spirit of Australian masculinity. And the men's sheds movement emerged in its own right, independently. It wasn't designed from the top down. It came from the grassroots up. There was random sheds about 25 years ago, and now there's more men's sheds than McDonald's in Australia. And there is something similar happening with younger men who are forming grassroots men's health movements, whether it's the Man Walk, whether it's the Mr. Perfect barbecues, whether it's Grab Life by the Balls, whether it's the Men's Table, whether it's the Tough Guys Book Club, there's loads of them out there. A lot of them are coming together on Saturday for our mental health movement meetup. Check it out. Check out the richness of the organizations there. This is men expressing that they want to play a role in this issue. And pretty much none of those organizations have any funding at a local or national level. In a few years' time, like the men's sheds movement, it will be recognized eventually. When people do all the research and they do all the advocacy and they form a peak body and all of that, let's fund that now. Because most people working in suicide prevention, and thank heavens you do, are women. Do we want less women working in suicide prevention? No. Do we want more men working in suicide prevention? Yes. Do men want to get involved? Yes. Let's get them involved on their terms, not tell them they have to be a certain way to do it. Let's let them own the solutions. Let's build a movement from the bottom up. And the policy framework needs to support that, not just support good practice, where we need to get better at giving men help at a clinical perspective or at GPs, but actually empower and enable men at a grassroots level through little bits of funding, through little bits of support, to create their own peer support networks, which they're doing because they're doing it anyway. And that's a strengths-based, asset-led approach. You take what men are doing already that's working and you let it grow and you help it grow. And that's what I want to see. It worries me that it'll take us 5-10 years to notice that, like it did with the men's sheds movement, before we actually start funding it.
Well, I'm fired up. I'm going to have to go do like 25 push-ups after Glen's comments. They resonated with me. And I guess that's our last question to all panelists is, what resonated with you, panelists? As you were listening to each other intently and with open minds and open hearts, what did you hear from somebody else on the panel today that you thought was particularly interesting or significant, or that you feel that you can apply in your own sort of work and practice? And maybe let's start with Alan, if we could, and then Glen, Rebecca, and Ivan.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. And, you know, I think the thing that's resonated with me is the importance of coming back to the experiences of men. That at the end of the day, we can talk all we like about, you know, what we should do and who should do it, but we have to make a difference to real men in real life. And it resonated to me, some of the points around how does that experience of men get brought forward? And, you know, we are very keen to include the perspectives of lived experience in suicide prevention, as we should. That has been a quantum shift in understanding and substance in this country in recent times. And it does need to be as applicable for the perspectives of men from all different backgrounds and perspectives, because there is no single male perspective. But men do need to be included and have voices around their experiences to shape the design of programs and services and community action, and to feel that they are being heard and included. That is part and parcel of where it needs to go. And I would like to encourage Glen a little. I actually do think that on the expert group of 20, there is more than just yourself that is sympathetic to the issues you're raising and wish to see improvements. And actually, throughout all the processes that are underway, there are people who will step up around these issues for men and male suicide prevention. But at the end of the day, we do need to listen to the men who need support, the men who have perspectives, and to find better ways. Now, you know, even the fact that this is happening today is an illustration of how it can occur. And I think it's just been wonderful that the Men's Association's been able to sponsor and support this panel discussion, this week of activities, and more of it should occur, because these dialogues, these reflections need to occur more so, and any way that we can strengthen that would be a good thing, I think.
Thank you, Alan. Glen, what resonated? Some final comments, and we are approaching about 5 minutes to go.
Right, thanks. I just need to pick up on Alan's response and just be really crystal clear that I'm saying I'm the only person in that room who is specifically advocating for men as their role in that room, and that's that. And that's not to say that the other 19 people don't care about men, aren't interested in men. They clearly are in different ways, but none of them is sitting at a table just having the lens of how does this affect men. And I think that's a really important thing to get. And that's what advocacy for a particular community is about. You get bored of the sound of your own voice, because I know when it comes to me, my turn, I'm going to say, what about the men? But that's my job in that room. And it's an important role. And I've played it at a city level in the UK, where I played it long enough that other people in the room would start to ask that question even if I wasn't there. And that's the power of the sort of sustainable advocacy, is that other people pick it up. But we're not there yet. And the point I'm making is that if I wasn't sitting in that room, I'm worried that it wouldn't be picked up with the same. I'm convinced it wouldn't be picked up with the same passion and enthusiasm that I would bring to that table. There we go. But not to argue with you, Alan. And what really resonated generally was that we all came together for this conversation. I'm really enjoying the experience of working with Alan and Christine Morgan. I think it's an extraordinary piece of work they're doing. And I'm glad I'm the one just looking at it from one perspective, not the person who's trying to take on the whole piece. It's a massive task. Really delighted to have got to know Ivan for the first time and find out about how they're approaching this issue in Queensland. That's really resonated with me, and I want to learn more. But Rebecca, I'm so sorry we haven't acknowledged you, because this work that you were doing, why did you time it with COVID-19? That was terrible timing on your behalf, right? So
yeah.
SPA came out with this stuff just as COVID-19 was hitting. And I don't know if you've noticed, but we've been a bit busy with the pandemic and now a summit. And we haven't even had time to acknowledge you on our website and say, well done. I mean, and well done is not, that's not even scratching the surface. This is a significant development in the world of suicide prevention, that the peak body for suicide prevention has now said that we need to focus on men. That's massive. And so that's what's resonated with me, is actually finally getting a chance to actually have this conversation with you. I want to have many more conversations with you, because we're a member organisation, we're a fellow peak body, and I want to work shoulder to shoulder with you on behalf of all our members and our broader network to actually see how far we can take this. And I'm just sorry that we haven't, you know, put more wind in your sails over the past 3 months, because we've been busy with a couple of other things. You timed it really badly. Next time, just check the diary for whether there's any pandemics coming, because it's a really bad time to release policy statements.
So I think, Rebecca, you've just been asked out for a coffee and your opportunity to say what resonated.
Yeah, look, who couldn't be blown away by Glen's passion and enthusiasm, and I guess, you know, your genuine passion and advocacy for men's health and men's suicide prevention. You mentioned the report. Well, in case anybody hasn't seen it, it's called Turning the Tide. Glen is quoted in the report in the section that's dealing with relationship breakdown, which really turned into a piece on male suicide prevention. So thanks so much, Glen, for offering your expertise into the development of that work. And you'll certainly hear more over the next couple of weeks around that work. We have some media stuff coming out. Just stay tuned, everybody. There'll be more. You'll be hearing more from us around Turning the Tide. But I guess I wanted to thank the panel today for having me as a part of this discussion. I am a woman, I'm not a man. I don't have the lived experience of being a man. So I do feel a little bit guilty about taking the spot that could have been taken by a bloke with policy expertise. But I think it's really important that I was a part of the discussion, because as you mentioned, Glen, I'm heading up policy and government relations for the peak body for suicide prevention. We can't make a difference in suicide if we're not making a difference for those 3 out of 4 suicide deaths who are men, for that 75%. And we can only do that by engaging directly with you and the people who have the expertise and advocacy experience in this space. So thank you so much for involving me. I've really enjoyed it.
We just have an online comment right now. Rebecca directed at you, and it says, "Don't you dare, in caps, feel guilty," etc., etc. Ivan, the final word goes to you.
Look, apart from thanking the panel members, look, I've certainly learned a lot, and I hope, you know, I've made a contribution to the discussion, but I think it's going to be the collective wisdom of a whole range of us in different positions that will make the difference eventually in terms of reducing particularly the rates of suicide amongst men. The bit that I took away, and before I go into those, I just wanted to sort of say, I've certainly thought about, and there were some comments I saw around that, you know, by pushing up to, you know, sort of upstream, are we sort of foregoing crisis service? I want to make it clear, crisis services are critical. Crisis services are critical, we need them, but it can't be at the expense of doing nothing else. And I think that's sort of trying to find a balance here. And I know there was a comment there, but particularly prevention now, if you think about COVID-19, we don't have treatment, we don't have a vaccine, our only approach was prevention. So I think the psyche in our society is much greater now around the benefits of prevention. And unless we take advantage of this in mental health generally, but in suicide prevention, we're going to miss the boat. I think there's a level of psyche that people can see. You can do a whole range of things around distancing, washing, all this stuff, which prevent the spread of this. Similarly, do prevention when it comes to mental health, and particularly around suicide. The second bit, and I just wanted to make this point generally, we took a very clear approach that every touch point by a man or other people who are contemplating suicide, every touch point is an opportunity to intervene, to support. And so I think we've taken that as a broad strategy under every life, which means that it could be your informal supports, it could be local community organisations, or it could be, you know, treatment services, or it could be employment or Centrelink or family court. All of those are touch points where we should have enough knowledge and capacity to help identify some of the risks that people or the stress that people are going through, and give them the right information and support, so they don't think about, maybe I don't need to be here tomorrow. I mean, I think those touch points, and every touch point is where we want to make sure that we do have some level of, I suppose, literacy around that. But what I did take away specifically was around that sort of, made with men in mind, and I don't think that we probably even did that, in developing policy. We certainly did have men in mind, but we could have done better. The point that Alan and others made around, not all men are the same. There's going to be, again, the differences that we need to keep making that way. But the bit that I think Glen talked about, period sort of workforce. I just wanted to say one of the things that I'm grappling with at the moment, I'm not sure who's making those noises, but I can hear something. But in terms of lived experience, Glen, and where some of the challenges is now that we've got people with lived experience of, suicide or attempted suicide. We've got people with lived experience of drug and alcohol. We've got people with now lived and living experience of mental illness. I think we are fragmenting all of this to some degree. There are some overlaps, there are some commonalities, but there are clearly some differences. I think we've got to get our handle around lived experience and how do we actually draw on each other's experiences from all those different areas to be able to get a much stronger, both peer workforce, but a lived experience voice at a whole range of these things. Otherwise, do we have 4 or 5 people at everything because they're slightly talking from a different perspective? And yes, those perspectives are important, but are we then fragmenting our strength is basically my fundamental question. And they're the things that I'm taking away, and like to thank you for giving me an opportunity to be a part of it.
Wonderful concluding comments there from Ivan, touched on so many things and demonstrated a tremendous degree of thoughtfulness and consideration and wisdom. And that's what I would say characterizes all of our panelists today, is sort of this lovely combination of wisdom and a real workman-like determination to get things done. We're in good hands when it comes to suicide prevention policy, if these are the people who are doing it. I also want to thank everybody who's been online. I've been following the commentary, and one of the things I'd say about the commentary is a ton of resources that you guys are sharing amongst each other, things that I'm picking up on and learning, whether it's an individual program or an evidence set, et cetera, really terrific. And I'm sure that AMHF will be capturing a lot of this in the post-conference context, et cetera. And that takes me to my final thank you to AMHF and to Glen for putting on this panel and for putting on this month. It really is amazing the way we are separate but together in this kind of conversation. And good words can only lead to good results. Thank you, everybody. I think you can stick around still on the chat. Otherwise, class dismissed.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Peter.
All the best.
Thanks, Rebecca. Thanks, Alan. Thanks, Ivan. And thanks, Peter. So yeah, you're free to go now, but I'm going to stick around and open up the room. If I'm not here, Mick will be. If any of our speakers are still around, you're welcome to throw questions at them whilst they're still around. But also just to take the mic and share anything you want to share coming out of that event, that conversation. I encourage you first to go to the bottom bar and find the participants icon and click on that. And click on it so that a bunch of names come up in the top right-hand corner, and you may see some icons there. Mick, they should be able to see can someone just raise a hand just to see if we can see if there's a, yeah, hand raising is working. Now, if you could just take hands down as well, so that when I ask for hands up, we'll be able to see who's actually asking. Yeah, great, brilliant. So it's working. So if you've got a point you want to make, or just an introduction and say hello, or you want to ask a question, first thing is to just pop up a hand and I'll see your name there, or also try posting something in the comment box. And I'll go for Paul Mashevsky. If you want to mute yourself, Paul. Yeah, there.
Hi, Glen. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, fantastic discussion. I think what stood out to me too, like I've been involved with men's wellbeing in Queensland for it's been going more than 30 years. There's a vast amount of volunteer men's groups going around the country that have huge experience in working with men. We've been trying to get a foot in the door with government constantly for the last 30 years. It's incredible hearing what's been going on with Ivan's initiatives with the Queensland government. It's certainly taken us a long time to try and get a voice in there. We've had huge success in working with men and men's groups, youth mentoring programs, father-son programs. There's this vast resource. We've often been told that the number of the men's organisations doing the work around Australia is some of the most advanced men's work in the world. in creating men's community and men's, ending men's isolation. And yet we've constantly struggled to get a foot in the door to be able to speak about our experience and what's been working for us. So it'd be really wonderful if some of the bureaucracies and the government departments could actually have a forum. I remember several years, 10 years ago, when the National Men's Health Strategy was being planned, they had discussion forums all around the country for people to have input into it. And a lot of our men's organisations had input then. But there's this vast resource of men's organisations that aren't really being listened to at the moment. People with, with runs on the board and feet on the ground. It would be great to have some sort of forum where those organisations could have input into what's actually working for them and what actually is benefiting men. And the whole area of situational distress and social determinants is really the way to take it. And I really agree with what Glen's saying about a separate men's suicide policy. Otherwise, it just gets lost. It gets lost in the main stream. Thanks very much. Wonderful conversation. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Paul. I want to come back on that just a little bit. So firstly, just to say hi. It's been too long, brother. It's been a long time since I've actually seen you and given you a hug. So Paul's the first person outside of probably customs control who I actually met in, the first friendly face I met in Australia. So I came out to speak at the National Men's Health Gathering when I was still living in England in 2013, which was in Brisbane. Men's Wellbeing, the organisation there that Paul referenced, was the host organisation. And I was just blown away because what struck me was, I mean, men's well-being's that sort of, in that simple stereotypical way, forgive me, Paul, people might sort of think of the type of men's well-being approach as being like the Iron John, men go into the woods and bang drums and hug each other type of thing. That's probably the point of being approach. It's men's circles, it's big gatherings out in nature. But it's so much more than that because it's about a community of really empowered, open-hearted men who care for each other and are all. What really struck me was every individual man I met from that network was in their own individual community making a difference, whether it was for boys or whether it was for separated dads or whether it's because they were working as a counsellor who specialised working with men. It was a vast network of men working with and supporting men in informal ways. And I think what's that network's still there, Paul. And I think when we went this time last year, AMHF during Men's Health Week went around the country to every state and territory. I mean, we went to the capital city, right? And Brisbane had this flavour that no other state and territory had. And it was that network of men who'd all done, great personal development work on themselves, had lots of great social connections, and were doing work mostly privately or voluntarily, not often in actually funded spaces. And there's this real hunger and energy to contribute and do something. And then most talking about, policy, practice, and people, the disconnect between policy and those men's groups and those men's networks is massive.
I agree. Yeah, totally.
It's massive, and part of what's missing there, I feel, there's lots of things that's missing, but part of what's missing there, I feel, is our, I don't want to use the word failure, but I'll just say the fact that we haven't formed a really good advocacy, a formal advocacy network in Queensland. A Queensland Men's Health Network, a Queensland Men's Health Forum, which is bringing those different organisations together and making sure that there's an interface between government. Now, is it those organisations' fault? They're already voluntarily running their own organisations. To then form a community group and do all of that takes a lot of work. And somehow government needs to reach out and recognise those groups because that's part of the asset that Queensland has, and that would be reflected across many different states and territories. But we've failed to create an interface between policy and people there, and it's not happening through the primary health networks. It's not happening through local government. It's not happening through the state government. It's missing, and it's actually a massive resource. And the point I was making about the men's mental health movement, it's a slightly different wave of the men's movement in the sense that it's more blokes out in more public places, setting up support groups in cafes and barbecues and on walks around the lake and stuff like that. It's a slightly different group. So it's a bit more visible than the men's circle kind of approach. But again, it's not being supported and recognized, and there's not an interface. So if we can do more of that, because those are the men, those are our starting point. The men are already in conversation, wanting to do the work. And the question is, how can we then, through that network, empower it and reach more of the men that are more vulnerable? And every single one of those men's circles will have had a suicidal men, right?
Totally, very much. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Paul. So, Karen, I'm going to go to the hands in the room. Karen McCall.
Oh, thanks, Glen. Just one of the things that we do in South Australia with community-based suicide prevention networks, of which we have 40 across the state, and majority of those are in regional areas, is we actually take a whole stack of resources and actually work alongside our suicide prevention network volunteers at all the major regional field days, country shows, fairs and things like that. And what's really blown me away, and we purposely situate our site in the primary industries and resources space. We share that space with them, or environment or water. So we're actually in those regional events in where you would expect farmers and people from the rural community, particularly men, to actually attend, because they have the fishing, we have the fishing people right alongside of us, and the people that deal with crop issues and all that sort of stuff. We're actually embed ourselves right in that space. But what I actually find, we have a table full of resources and it's really well received, but there's no real men's specific resources. They're all very generic resources. And I'm having a little bit of a battle, to be honest, with Beyond Blue at the moment, because they've actually stopped producing printed material, and they're going all down the track of only online. So I've actually emailed them to say that's not good enough. You can't expect we need to get suicide prevention resources and material out into the public, which is what we're trying to do. Not everyone has access to the internet. We know that the elderly struggle with it, but what I find with all the resources we have in our kit, which is substantial, there's real lacking on men's specific resources. And I'd like to know from your events and your group, what resources would a man like to actually be handed or to see on those stands or at those events, and what would be helpful to them?
Yeah, so it's a good question. And I mean, the caveat that there are many different types of men, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But next Friday we're launching our male-friendly services report. So there's a big focus in the National Men's Health Strategy and just in the men's health sector generally. And people use slightly different language. Some will say male-centered, male-friendly, man-friendly, right? Gender-specific. We talk about male-friendly, and we from both sort of experience and evidence, we've pulled together what some of the key features are of male-friendly services. And we list 10 things. And we actually start with promotion, because actually I was having this conversation about QPR with someone yesterday. The QPR training, it's an hour long. You can do it online. It spits out great data at the back, but all the evidence I've seen is, generally speaking, and this is true of most gatekeeper training, it reaches 70% women and 30% men. Now, there's basically one of two reasons for that. Either it's just not written, the training just doesn't work for men, so men don't do it, or the training is just promoted in a gender neutral way into a space which is mostly sort of female, like the social care sector or the healthcare sector, and therefore more women do it. And if you actually targeted it at men, more men would do it. And actually, I then give the example of mates in construction who use Safe Talk and Assist, and 85% of people who do their training are men, because they target it where men are in the workplace, right? So the very first rule of male-friendly services is start from the assumption that your service is actually pretty good, and what you're offering is, like the QPR training, pretty good. And then do what a marketer would do. Do what a beer brand would do, and actually just promote it more effectively. And it's a real cliche. And it's not about what's in the information. It's actually, is the information actually specifically targeted at men? Does it say men and suicide, or men and mental health, or just does it say your mental health? Right? And that won't reach all men, but it will reach more men. And we've got a couple of nice examples in the men's health space. There's the Men Shed Spanner in the Works toolkit, which is pretty good. There's people like the Men's Health Education Resource Van in New South Wales, and the Regional Men's Health Initiative in WA, who go out and specifically target stuff at blokes. And then there's this little thing that's been going around the men's health sector for about 15 years or so now, called the Blokes Book, which now has many different formats, but basically it's just a list. It's usually localized. It started in Western Sydney. There's versions in New Zealand. There's versions in WA. There's the Tasmanian version's very good, and there's Men's Resources Tasmania down in Tasmania. Funnily enough, they produced a version of the Blokes Book, which just, most of the service it references are generic services, but the whole book is tailored in a way that says this is for blokes. And so, guess what? Blokes pick it up. So just the effort of actually specifically targeting promotion and resources at men specifically, like a beer brand would do if they wanted to reach more men, is making something more male friendly. Now, there's many other layers of that, but it's a start. It's better than where you are. So I'd have a look at the Blokes Book, Spanner in the Works, and look at our male-friendly services report that comes out next Friday for some ideas. But yeah, the fact that you're noticing that and asking that, but the way to find out is you need to engage, obviously, with the men in the communities you're trying to reach and find out what they would need and what they would find useful. Yeah. But does anyone else want to sort of, I'm aware that Alan and I think as Rebecca had to go, Alan, is there anything you want to add into this conversation while we've still got you?
No, nothing specific. I'm interested in hearing from other people.
Right. Okay. So thanks for that point, Karen. Kylie King, Dr. Kylie King, who's going to be speaking on Friday.
Hi, Glen.
Good to see you.
Lost my video. Hi, Glen. Hi, everybody. Thanks for today's event. It's been so good. I've really enjoyed it. So yeah, I'm a researcher at Monash Uni, and I'm interested in suicide prevention for boys and men. And what I'm really interested in is interventions, how interventions can make a difference. And I think listening today and what you were saying before, Glen, there is a real disconnect between what's happening at a grassroots level, what's happening at policy, and even the evidence base. And I think a big problem is that, we've heard today about heaps of stuff that's happening, heaps of great interventions and programs for men around the country. But the problem is that we don't know about them all, and we don't know about the programs. Even people delivering programs don't know about other programs. And there's very little research and evaluation work done on any of those programs to let us know, what it is about them that might work. And there's an incredible wealth of knowledge that's not being tapped into and not being accessed. And I don't know how to overcome that problem, but like there was a scoping review done in 2019 about men's suicide prevention. It only found 22 papers about men's suicide prevention. So we know so little, but yet there's so much happening on the ground. And so getting that knowledge and translating it into something that can be shared and translated into further action, I think is a massive challenge. And I don't quite know how to overcome it, but I don't know, that's what's come to my mind today.
Yeah, and look, we did an event with PHNs yesterday, because as you'll be well aware, both through the pilot sites and different PHNs taking on the lifespan model, there's a lot of projects that have been focused down at a local level, because men have been identified at the sort of commissioning stage as a priority group. And so I think 6 of the 12 pilot sites target men, but also then some of the other sites that have picked up the lifespan model, I mean, notably in Victoria, have targeted men. And we got them together yesterday. And I had an awareness, as you would expect, because I'm a nerd in this space, but like, I'd heard of stuff yesterday I wasn't aware of at all. And part of the challenge is that there's a real sort of challenge just in this this is more like the sort of project practice piece between developing programs that can replicate easily, but also allowing communities to actually develop their own solutions or bring in the solutions that they say they want, rather than just sort of piloting in things from the top down. But one thing that emerged from our last Tuesday we had a roundtable in New South Wales with the Minister for Mental Health there, and one thing that emerged out of that for us is Every Mind getting in touch. And for those who don't know, Every Mind is funded by the government to essentially do communication around suicide prevention, but it's not like just marketing. It's actually, and they explain it better than me, but it's sharing good practice and good evidence and all the rest of it, and good data and statistics, and trying to make sure that the public conversation about suicide is well informed. They raised the idea that they should be working with people like us to capture that information about what's happening around men and suicide specifically. And so we're going to have a conversation with them about that. And if we do, it's not something we want to own, it's something we want to facilitate and start to bring the different research and the different examples of projects. But also I must mention Men's Health Information and Resource Centre, the Mengage website, does sort of capture a fair bit of stuff, not everything, but a fair bit of stuff as well. Looking forward to Friday. It'd be good to see you.
Yeah, that would be good. That sounds great, Glenn. Thanks.
Thanks, Kylie. And Mary O'Brien, are you bog mate?
Hi, everyone. Just wanted to speak to Karen's point about what sort of resources, and just applaud her on where they're targeting men, because you're actually in their comfort zone rather than setting up a special men's mental health thing, because they won't come to those, but they will go to those field days and things where you're located. My background is in extension, agricultural extension, so that's my area of expertise, and only been working in this space for a couple of years really, but I guess it's understanding the demographic and what they need and how they learn really in targeting those resources that you're trying to get to men. So in the general population, we'd be looking about, I think it's about 65% of the normal population are visual learners. So they learn by seeing and reading things. But once you get into agriculture and rural areas, you're looking at probably 70 to 80% of those men are kinesthetic learners. So if you go and put a book that thick on a table, they're never going to pick it up, or they might pick it up, but they're never going to read it. Then they don't learn that way, and that's not how they absorb information. So really targeting the information to the way they learn I find is absolutely critical.
Right. Thanks, Mary. And yeah, this really follows the pattern of the male-friendly services report we have, that after promotion, it then goes to where you actually engage with men, meeting men where they are, which is exactly what you're doing. And again, there's no one place to meet men where they are. You can't just go to the football ground or the pub and expect them all to be there. We don't all congregate in the same place, despite what Clinton's or Hallmark's Father's Day cards will tell you. It's not all sport and beer. There's more complexity to men than that. But yeah, meeting men where they are, it's shown to work over and over again. So someone else, anyone got a hand or just open your mic and shout out if I'm not catching you. So I'm just going to respond to the question in the chat box. Someone's asking, I've posted a link. Hi, Justin. I posted a link to the Blokes book, and got a question about is it just in Tassie? There's It's done at a local level. So I think Western Australia did one. Guys in Western Australia did one a couple of years ago. They also did one specifically with Aboriginal men. One of the interesting things they did with the Aboriginal men's book was they thought, how are we going to get the Aboriginal blokes to picture them? And they just need to find the mic. Someone's mic is live. Is it you, Justin? Or is it not? It was Tina before. I can find that mic, or Mick can't. Yeah, it's gone. And this would work. This would work in lots of contexts. But with the Aboriginal blokes book, they rather than getting all the standard Aboriginal stock photography from iStock, they made the whole book rich with pictures, and they made the pictures of different men within the Aboriginal communities they were reaching out to. And they said, it's like, if we want to get them to pick it up, at the very least, they're going to pick it up to see if someone they know is in there. And once they pick it up to see if someone they know is in there, then they're going to see the information about accessing services. So that's, it's a nice example of actually engaging with the community that you want to communicate with, rather than just, pushing generic information from the top down. Justin, did you want to say something?
Just wanted to say thank you for another great session. I do have to go, but I'll see you in the next one.
Great. Thanks for being here, Justin.
Thanks to all the panelists. It was fantastic.
Yeah, they were good, weren't they? It's a good conversation.
Thanks all. Bye.
Thank you. Okay, so it feels like this is the point where the conversation might start to come to an end, unless I'm going to start calling people. I might just say.
Could I just ask whether there will be a recording available for anybody who couldn't come?
Yeah, so we're recording all the sessions. This is a new phenomena for us. I've seen a couple of the sessions actually come through, and we've got the video. We haven't worked out yet how we're going to share it, but we will. Our intention is to do that, but also, a couple of things, just the practicalities of managing all that will take a little bit of time, but also we don't want to make it too easy for people not to come to the real thing. So we're not just making the video. We want people in the room, because it's never the same. But yes, very much. Thank you. These conversations are really valuable, so we want to make sure that they're shared in a way that's easy for people to access and use, but it'll take a little time. There's got a hand there from Julian.
Yeah, I was just wondering, I know we can get the transcript from the chat group, which is fantastic, but I'm wondering, because I was handwriting and then I started typing, and I'm just trying to catch what's happening in the presentations. Is there a transcript, or is it just...
we did a transcript for the event that we did last week. It's easy for us to get. It just costs a little bit of money. I'm looking at doing transcripts, certainly for key events. I think today's conversation is a really key one to get transcripts.
Yeah, because
we will.
It's just so much quicker to be able to go back through it and pick up the stuff rather than have to watch it again.
Totally. Again, Julian, you just have to bear with us.
Yeah, that's great, because I'm getting better at it.
Yeah,
I'm here.
So those who don't know, you all those kind of links and things that people have pasted, and this is for today, but also on another occasion. As we come to the end, you look at the chat box and there's the 3 dots. If you click on there, there's a little option to save chat, and it just instantly downloads in a basic Word not even a Word document, a text document to your desktop or your download box. So that's quite useful, just to grab like the sort of resources and links that people share.
That's only from the time that you've joined the meeting. I found out last time.
Last time you joined the meeting, as Julian found out, correct? So it's only your personal chat box, and people like leave emails and things like that, so that's useful. I want to say, Owen Connolly, who's going to be one of our speakers tomorrow, aren't you? When you say hello to this room, Owen Connolly. Oh, good. This is the microphone test for tomorrow. You're very blurry. We need to sort that out tomorrow. No, you're sounding like a Dalek, my friend. I think I'm going to have to change my background to the TARDIS to actually to fit in with your Dalek voice. Owen, you're going to need to get that sorted by tomorrow, because you're just coming across like you're in a bucket of water. I don't know if it's your headset. No good. No good. Okay, you're going to have to mute yourself. Go and test it though, please, because you're one of our really important panelists tomorrow. So Owen works down in the Trove region, mental health nurse, and one of those people that when you go into an area, his name gets mentioned by lots of different people. So when I was doing going around the country, talking to different states and territories about male suicide, when I got to Melbourne, Victoria area, like half a dozen people all in the same over a couple of days said, you need to talk to Owen. And so Owen's got a great resource, lots of experience, coming from a mental health nurse practitioner, but also I've also got an awareness of the policy framework that he works in, and how that influences and impacts his ability and the ability of other mental health nurses to do their work. So he's speaking at the rural when he gets his microphone sorted out. Give Lynn a shout or someone if you can, make sure that's working. We've also got Anthony at Tomnet. Do you want to say hi? Just let people know where you're from.
Yeah, thanks, Glenn. Nice to be here. I've been in this last couple of sessions. I'm sort of starting to feel like a little fish in a huge sea. It's amazing what's going on around the country with all these programs and stuff. Just to give a quick idea of what we do, we're up in Toowoomba in Queensland. We run a men's organisation for older men, so we target guys 50 plus, mainly guys who are retired. But what we're trying to break into is get guys who are transitioning from work into retirement or that transition period to help them manage and support them in that transition. A lot of guys struggle in that 5 years after finishing their work, and work being a huge part of their life. So that's really exciting. I run a program to help fellas. Even though I'm not retired myself, we help these guys. We support them to manage that retirement period. So we deal with older fellas.
Yeah, great. I'm really looking forward to. You've been involved in some of our Older Men's Health Network conversations we've been having. I'm really concerned about the well-being of older men at this particular time.
Definitely. Yep.
And looking forward to seeing you on and Louise on Friday.
Friday.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I think I don't know, Stuart O'Neill. Do you have a hand raised? Or was that? Have you just?
Yep. Hello.
Hey, Stuart.
How you going there, Glenn?
Really good. How are you?
Very well, thanks. Very well. I've loved today. It's been fantastic again. And just to comment on the previous one is like, yeah, it feels like a minnow in a fish pond for how much amazing stuff's actually happening out there. And I'm sure that there's half of Australia would be just stunned if they knew just how many effective small programs are in place that aren't heard of. What I was listening to some of the comments just in the last sort of 15 minutes, Glenn. Part of my background is, I guess, I'm an entrepreneur type person through and through from when I was a teenager, and just recently I'm hearing, along the news and through a close friend of mine that 100 newspapers have been closed down regionally across Australia in the last week or so. But I know through experience that printing those old type of newspapers is actually quite cheap. And hearing a lot of what people are saying, and the men don't want to pick up big books, and we've got to make information easy and available to lots of people. I feel like potentially there's an opportunity. There's a lot of staff out there now that have lost their jobs, and there's printing presses that are sitting idle around Australia that can do the web platen process, which is a newspaper. Is having a men's health newspaper that's free and just only targeted at men, that comes out maybe once a month or 4 times a year, that's just distributed to building sites and football clubs and pubs and hairdressers and barbers and wherever men are, is making something like that really available, that's got all of these resources state by state, lived in stories in there, work opportunities, how to get into the industry, all sorts of different things. Like that wouldn't be a huge amount of money to put something like that together and just have this newspaper that floats around the country that's just solely targeted at men. I feel like potentially there's an opportunity for that. And within even all of these groups that I'm seeing today, there'll be skill everywhere that could pull that together pretty quickly and for a small amount of money, I would think.
Yeah, there's certainly no shortage of stories and information. And the very first male suicide prevention charity that I ever worked with was an organisation called Campaign Against Living Miserably in the UK. And they did a lot of what we've been talking about in this last sort of 15, 20 minutes around information and reaching men where they are. So they started in the northwest of England. They were similar to what Ivan was talking about. It was around about the time when there was a big focus on younger men's suicide. And so they were focused on young men in Liverpool and then Manchester. And they recognised that there was no point working really hard to improve how the existing mental health services operated and worked with younger men, because the younger men just weren't in the system anyway. And so they went out to the places where young men were. They built relationships with young men through the club scene, through fashion, through comedy and live entertainment and that type of stuff. And they had many different kind of ways of doing that. And one was that they built a partnership with one of the key sort of national clothes shops. This is in the days before people shopped online, right? And there was a bloke's clothes shop in every high street. And I forget what they called it, but they had a monthly. They had exactly that. They had a monthly magazine, and it was smart. You know, it wasn't called "This is the Men's Health Information," magazine. It just looked like a men's lifestyle mag. It was kind of mental health and well-being by stealth. Really well done. Really spoke to the audience it was trying to reach. And the important piece is it had the distribution channel, because it was distributed through partnership with this shop when men were, particularly at the weekends. Saturdays, but the shop was full of blokes, young men getting the latest clothes to go out on a Saturday night. So good luck in making that happen, Stuart. It's good to have the ideas. Entrepreneurs have about 100 ideas before breakfast, don't they? But it's who's gonna turn that into reality. So thanks, Stuart. And Julian.
Just to follow up a bit on that newspaper thing, and also what Mary was saying before about people that don't read a whole lot necessarily, farmers or agricultural people. I've just been through the process of trying to put some brochures together for my new role, and trying to find photos that are of any quality or any relevance to this context in Australia has been a bit of a interesting exercise. I'm just wondering, and maybe it's just a silly idea, like that, one of those ones before breakfast, but if there was some central way that people could send photos into you, Glen, that were potentially of any use, and you could just store them, and then if there was consent given, then any photos that can be used by whatever organisation, because it's really hard to get good photos without buying licenses online for some big overseas thing, and then you get photos that seem that they're from Africa or America or somewhere anyway, or you can buy them. There's some good ones here in Australia, but it costs money every time to buy a photo. Yeah. Maybe that's a way, and then you've got a good reason. You can have, like, whether it's online resources or printed resources, you've got access to a good range of photos, and you don't have to put so many words in.
Yeah, I love ideas where the end of the task is that I get nominated to do something, but it's something our comms team is just trying to do with a very small comms team of one person on 20 hours a week. But she has been doing an awesome job of building up our photo library for exactly that reason. And some of our best photos, she's got a good mind to sort of search out things that we're buying on, photo stock and places like that. But some of our best photos in our growing library come from our members. It's Aussie blokes around a barbecue at a meetup, Aussie blokes on a walk, Aussie blokes in a shed. Those types of things. The pictures where you can tell they're not models. Let's just say that they're real. They're rigid Aussie blokes. So anyone else? We're getting towards 12 o'clock. I think we've been online for 2 hours, and it's a good point to round up. But I'm happy just to. I want to say hello, if you're there, to Kev James, because I haven't said hello during the summit yet. I noticed your name there, Kev James at the Circle of Men.
Yes, hello, Glenn. Thank you. I've been sitting quietly in the background, typing away and taking notes and getting some ideas for networking with people, especially that free magazine that Paul was talking about that comes out twice yearly. Circle of Men talks to elderly men in aged care facilities in Brisbane. We need more volunteers. We have 15 facilities, 50 or 60 volunteers. Unfortunately, we're still in dialogue and trying to open up gradually some of our services back into certain nursing homes because only relatives and essential workers are allowed back in at the moment. However, a couple have trialled the online iPad or tablet or whatever it's called, but the diversional therapists need to be au fait with that technology. And it's a learning process for the fellas who are over 85, and we're trying to get back in through the door. So this discussion is wonderful, finding about all these grassroots organizations that are around. So thank you for the opportunity, and I'll talk again on Friday, hopefully. See you all then, some of you.
Yeah. Are you joining us this Friday, Kevin?
Yes. Hang on. No, this Friday, during your session, unfortunately. I beg your pardon. It's next Friday, 12th of June, where I'm saying.
Yeah. So this Friday is we hope to get Kev this Friday for the older men's health session. We have got Phil from Men's Den down in Victoria, who's doing some work engaging with men in aged care facilities. So that sort of conversation will be in there. And Circle of Men from Brisbane, which Kev represents, will be joining us for our conversation around male-friendly services next Friday. So
if I can get in this Friday for a short while, I will, but I think we're overlapping by about half an hour with something else. But I'd love to be there. Let's see what happens.
Sure. We'll make sure that you're referenced because it's a very important work you're doing. Yeah. Okay, so anyone want to say hello or goodbye as we wind down the conversation? I know I've certainly had really enjoyed both the panel conversation, having such high-level people focused on and talking about male suicide has been really, really powerful for me, a highlight of the year so far. I was going to say a highlight of the week, but it's only Wednesday, so I thought I'd reach a bit further and go for a highlight of the year. And not to be insincere, it really has been a highlight, a really valuable meeting so many people from around the country who are interested in this conversation, old friends and new faces. It's great to see. I can see the numbers are falling down now to 24, so your last chance to say hello, goodbye. We'll close down the room in the next couple of minutes. Thank you all. Thanks, Owen. Thanks, Alan, in particular, one of our speakers. Good to see you, Paul. Thanks, Gustavo, from joining us from South America. Thanks, Mary O'Brien and Angeline and Siobhan and Francis. Thanks, Lloyda. Jed, hi. Is that Jed from Brisbane North or a different Jed?
Yes.
Hello, Jed from Brisbane North.
Hello.
Good to see you.
Thank you.
Dave McNair from Corinity, Lionel Solomon, Jaspreet and Lynn from the team. Goodbye to you all. In the moment, if you don't want to say anything, we'll start to kick you out and close the room down because our producer Mick has got a life and he needs to give me some training as well.